is that the Salaf, they kept things succinct, nice and short. They didn't say more than they needed to say. It was easy to understand. There was not a lot of difficulty. They didn't make up lots of complicated and complex possibilities and situations. They kept the religion easy to understand, but they still explained their reasoning. Don't think that they didn't explain the reason they had. They did, but they explained it in a simple, easy to understand way. Why? Because what was the goal of the Salaf? For you to act. What was the goal of the Khalaf? To show how clever they were. That's what he's saying. That's what Ibn Rajab is saying. The Khalaf, these people, their goal is to show how clever they are. Whereas the goal of the Salaf is for you to practice your religion properly. So they just keep it nice and simple. Even though, and Ibn Rajab mentions this later on, do you not think that Abu Bakr and Umar and Uthman and Ali radiallahu anhum were the most knowledgeable of all of the fuqaha? No one knew more fiqh than them. Again, their statements are simple, easy, small, few lines, very simple to understand. Whereas later on, people came, and you can honestly say, I think we mentioned it yesterday, that the Salaf said 3 words you could write a book about. And the Khalaf wrote a book about something you could have said in 3 words. And we're not saying absolutely no doubt from among the people who came later on were those people who benefited the ummah greatly. But this is what we see generally as a trend. We see that the Salaf were very sincere. They wanted people to understand. They wanted people to practice. They kept it short. They kept it brief. They were scared about saying too much. Many of the later people have been tried. And they have a fitna, a shubha. And that is that they think the person who has lots of words and arguments and lots of disputes and debates is more knowledgeable than the person who doesn't. And this is jahlun mahd, pure ignorance. Look at Abu Bakr and Umar and Ali and Mu'adh and Abdullah ibn Mas'ud and Zayd ibn Thabit radiyallahu anhum. Their words were less than the words of Abdullah ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma, and yet they were more knowledgeable than Abdullah ibn Abbas. And this is an example among the Sahaba. Abdullah ibn Abbas, Sahabiyun Jalil. He was from the younger Sahaba, right? They said when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam died, they differed about his age, but they said somewhere around 15 years old when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam died. And Abdullah ibn Abbas went out and he sought knowledge from all of these senior Sahaba. And the kalam of Abdullah ibn Abbas in the Masail Fiqhiyya is more than those companions. Yet we know for certain that Abu Bakr had more knowledge than him. And Umar had more knowledge than him. And Uthman and Ali and Mu'adh, and they had all had more knowledge than him. But as time goes by, the speech becomes more and the knowledge becomes less. This is not a criticism of Abdullah ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma. Rather, Abdullah ibn Abbas did a great virtue, which is what the Khalaf should do, which is jam'u aqwal al-Salaf. Abdullah ibn Abbas is from the Salaf, like the meaning is for with regard to him. He took what his Salaf said and he brought it together and he summarized it and he taught it to the people. So by default, he's going to speak more. Why? Because he's bringing everything that he learned from the Prophet ﷺ, from Abu Bakr, from Umar, from Uthman, from Ali, and he's bringing it all together and teaching it to the people. So he's going to speak typically more. But you shouldn't understand from that he was more knowledgeable than Abu Bakr. Rather, in every single field, Abu Bakr was more knowledgeable, without a shadow of a doubt. And Abu Bakr was more knowledgeable. But as time went on, definitely the tabi'een, what did they do? The tabi'un, they gathered the statements of the Sahaba, they brought it together, they heard from many different Sahaba, they brought all the narrations down, so they spoke more. But did they have more knowledge or less knowledge? They had less knowledge than the Sahaba, no doubt. They were خَيْرُ الْقُرُونِ قَرْنِي ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونَهُمْ. They were less than the Sahaba. But because, why did they speak more? First of all, they needed to use more words to explain because the knowledge was less. And secondly, they're gathering what the Sahaba said. So if I've taken, for example, from 10 shuyukh, then I'm going to speak sometimes more because I'm bringing what all of them said to me, and then someone else who is with me heard from different, and they're going to bring more speech like that. But at the end of the day, more speech doesn't mean more knowledge. And so if you look at those who followed the tabi'een, they spoke more than the tabi'een. And yet they had more, the tabi'un had more knowledge than them. The words of the next generation of the successors were more than the first generation, even though the latter knew more than the former. Therefore, and he quotes here, he doesn't mention, but it's a quote of Imam Malik, لَيْسَ الْعِلْمُ بِكَثْرَةِ الرِّوَايَةِ. Knowledge is not by narrating a lot. And Ibn Rajab adds, it's not about having an opinion on everything, but it's a light which Allah plants into your heart, and by which the servant understands the truth, and through this light, they can see the difference between what is false and what is true. And that's why generally when you hear the word light in the Quran related to a person, that Allah has given them nur. أَوَمَنْ كَانَ مَيْتًا فَأَحْيَيْنَاهُ وَجَعَلْنَا لَهُ نُورًا يَمْشِي بِهِ فِي النَّاسِ. That this nur is nur al-ilm. It means knowledge, by which a person can see the right thing and the wrong thing. The Prophet ﷺ spoke less than the Sahaba. He was given jawami' al-kalim, and that's a miracle. The Prophet ﷺ, what he was given was a miracle. He was given, he said, utitu, I was given by Allah, jawami' al-kalim. Jawami' al-kalim means to say a huge amount in a few words. So the Prophet ﷺ says, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّةِ. So a few words, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّةِ or إِنِّيَّات. It's like 3 words. And from there, you can fill a full shelf of books you could write on the topic of إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّات. In 70 different topics of fiqh, let alone the topics of i'tiqad and the topic, you can go from just few words. And that's why if you look at the 40 hadith of Imam al-Nawawi, where he gathered some of the jawami' al-kalim of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you see just a few small words, and yet the benefit from it, nobody else can speak like that. There's no sahabi, there's no one can speak like the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam spoke. That he says 1 word or 2 words, and from there you can build rulings and books and lessons and understanding from 1 word or 2 words that the Prophet ﷺ said. And even greater than that is the speech of Allah Azza wa Jal. The speech of Allah is not comparable to the speech of anyone. Rather, as Ibn al-Qayyim said, rahimahullah ta'ala, the difference between the speech of Allah and the speech of the people is like the difference between Allah and the people. Because it's a sifa lillahi azza wa jal, it's a sifa of Allah. So that ultimately the difference between Allah's characteristics and ours is the difference between Allah and us. لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. There's nothing like him. So the speech of Allah, you cannot compare anything to it. So when you look at the Quran and the Sunnah, the Prophet ﷺ is given revelation from Allah, and Allah gives him a miracle of being able to say a huge amount with just a few words. His words were the most concise. This shows that what is the virtue? The virtue is in saying less and meaning more. That's where the fadl is. That's where the virtue is. And that is in line, of course, with what the ulama of balagha, eloquence, and in the language say, that eloquence and beauty in language is about saying a lot of meaning with very few words. That's a principle in balagha even. The more words you use, the more you go over things, and the more you kind of like reword things, you lose eloquence in the speech. And the Prophet ﷺ used to repeat what he would say. He would speak slowly, he would repeat so people would understand what he said. But his speech was extremely concise. So this shows that there is a prohibition against excessive speech. and being loose with your words, like not caring about what you say. Here, Ibn Rajab rahimahullah ta'ala, he says that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, Allah never sent a prophet except to convey the message. And doctored, elaborate speech is from the shaitan. Here, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam means that a person speaks to the extent that is needed. So the Prophet spoke enough to convey the message. But as for the excessive speech, the Prophet ﷺ used to forbid some of the companions from it. And there are numerous narrations like that where the Prophet ﷺ said to people to limit what you're going to say. قُولُوا بِقَوْلِكُمْ, say what you're going to say, أَوْ بَعْضِ قَوْلِكُمْ, or something from what you're going to say. And you just keep it to the point. The sermons of the Prophet ﷺ were brief, and his speech was such that you could count what he would say on your fingers, and you could count and remember easily what it is that he said. And he said, إِنَّ مِنَ الْبَيَانِ لَسِحْرًا, indeed, from speech is that which is magic. Ibn Rajab takes the view that this is completely blameworthy, and that's a view among the ulama. There are three views regarding this hadith, إِنَّ مِنَ الْبَيَانِ لَسِحْرًا. The first view is that this was said by way of praise. The Prophet ﷺ praised the eloquence and the speech of people. And the second view is that it's blameworthy, and that's the view Ibn Rajab takes, that the Prophet ﷺ is blaming and saying, don't speak like those people whose speech is like magic. And the third view is the view that it can be praiseworthy at times and blameworthy at times according to what a person uses their speech for. And Ibn Rajab, he takes the view that this is purely blameworthy and it is not praiseworthy as some thought. And the context of these words will make you certain of this. And At-Tirmidhi and others quote the hadith of Abdullah ibn Amr that the Prophet ﷺ said, Allah hates the excessively eloquent among men who move their tongues between their teeth like the cows do. And they're wrapping their tongues around words for not in order to clarify or to say what you came to say, but to fool the people into thinking there is some substance, or to exaggerate beyond the limits of the Sharia. So don't misunderstand that it's not people saying that, for example, you shouldn't be eloquent or you shouldn't have a nice way of speaking. But what is meant here is that you're wrapping your tongue around the words, either like the ayah came, لِتَحْسَبُوهُ مِنَ الْكِتَابِ وَمَا هُوَ مِنَ الْكِتَابِ. So you think it's from the Quran, but it's not from the Quran. And to fool the people with the decorative speech. Or the person is just prolonging their speech so you can't understand what are you getting at. Like, what did you come to say? So they go around and up and down and inside and outside, but you never actually get to, look, come and say what it is that you came to say. There are many narrations from the Prophet ﷺ and the companions such as Umar and Sa'ad and Ibn Mas'ud and Aisha radiallahu anhum. All of them said similar meanings regarding speaking clearly, speaking to the point, saying what you have to say, and not dressing up your speech to hide what you mean, or dressing up your speech to give a false impression. But if a person is eloquent naturally, without takalluf, then there's no blame in this. For example, it's mentioned about Sheikh Bakr Abu Zayd, rahimahullah ta'ala. Sheikh Ibn Uthaymeen mentioned Sheikh Bakr Abu Zayd, in recent times, rahimahullah ta'ala, was very, very eloquent, to the point where sometimes you struggle to understand what he's saying. Like really, Sheikh Ibn Uthaymeen said, I saw Sheikh Ibn Uthaymeen say that Sheikh Ibn Uthaymeen said, I had to have the dictionary open when I read the works of Sheikh Bakr Abu Zayd, because I don't understand what he means. Sheikh Ibn Uthaymeen says, I don't understand what he means. Lakin it was without takalluf. He didn't mean to do that, like it wasn't him trying to make it so beautiful or so. It's just he naturally has a wide vocabulary. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's always good to make your speech simple and understandable and to the point. And that's how the Salaf used to speak. You don't see, like sometimes even I personally really dislike the khutbah, where the khutbah is like a poetry lesson. And you can't actually understand what the khatib is actually getting at. Personally, I dislike it. Wallahi, I really dislike it. And I heard Shaykh Abdul Razak al-Badr, Hafidhullah Ta'ala, say the same thing. And it's personally, I don't like it. Like in the Imam of the Haramain do it, and you know that it's very eloquent and very heavy and very poetic, and like really it's like a beautiful, it's a work of art in itself, yani the khutbah. Like in the end, most people don't understand. A lot of people, yani until the ayah comes, you think now, okay, when I heard the ayah, I understand what you mean. But otherwise, like unless you had a doctorate in Arabic, you couldn't translate it even. You didn't understand what the person said. For this is not tariqatul salaf. It's tariqatul khalaf in reality. Tariqatul salaf, wallahi, I heard Shaykh Abdul Razak say, praise the people who even give the khutbah in the language of the people, the simple language of the people. He said, if your congregation, all of them speak Ammiyah, they only speak like broken Arabic of their tribe, speak to them. You don't have to go like down to their level, but speak with simple words that they understand. Don't give them a poetry lesson that the people say in there saying, what did he say? Speak to the people in the way they understand. If you don't do that, you're going to be the reason why people reject the religion. And this is the way of the Salaf. So one of the virtues of the Salaf is their Arabic was better than the Arabic of the people who came after, right? Much better. And they were in Asr al-Ihtijaj, al-Lughawi, the time when language was considered to be a proof. And when they spoke, like what they say is considered to be like any proper Arabic. But still, it's easier to understand than some of the later works, which is very like complicated and very like poetic and very beautiful as a like I say, almost like an art, like of poetry. It's very beautiful, but it's not really getting the message across. So it's very important for a person to speak in a way that is clear and simple, and people can take the message and implement it. Therefore, it's necessary to realize that not everyone who speaks a lot, delving into great detail, is more knowledgeable than the one who doesn't. We've been tried by the ignorant among people who start to believe that just because someone speaks a lot, he's more knowledgeable than the people who've preceded him. Among them are some who believe a person is more knowledgeable than the companions and those who came after them simply because he goes into minute details when explaining a matter and has an opinion about everything. Some of this group say he's more knowledgeable than the famous fuqaha who are followed. However, this statement of theirs implies the same as the previous. What does it mean, implies the same as the previous? It means that if you say, let's say we have a person in our time, and you say he's more knowledgeable than Malik, by default, you're saying Malik was more knowledgeable than the Sahaba. Why? Because the reason you said he's more knowledgeable than Malik is he has more views than Malik. But Imam Malik had more views reported from him than, for example, Abdullah ibn Abbas, who had more views reported than Abu Bakr. So by your measure that you've used, not only is he more knowledgeable than Malik, but he's more knowledgeable than Abu Bakr as well. Because the measure you've used is kathratul kalam, and having a view about every single issue. He says, this is because those famous legal jurists spoke more than those who came before them. So if someone came after them knows more than them because of his detailed discussions, then for sure they are more knowledgeable than those who came before them and spoke less than them, like al-Thawri and al-Uza'i and Layth and al-Mubarak and those of their generation and those who came before them from the successors and the companions. Such a stance is clearly disrespect towards the Salaf al-Salih, and it amounts to having an evil opinion of them and accusing them of ignorance or deficiency in knowledge, and there is no strength or ability except with Allah. Abdullah bin Mas'ud, his statement where he said, among mankind, the companions had the most righteous of hearts and the most in-depth knowledge. The companions, they were the most righteous in the hearts and they had the most knowledge. And they had the least takalluf, the least burdening of themselves. And that's why, honestly, if you look at some of the sciences, particularly, I give you an example, particularly, for example, usul al-fiqh. You read the books of the later people and you feel like this is a very difficult science. Nobody could understand it except the most intelligent people and the most any geniuses of this ummah. It's too difficult to understand. Like in Saraha, when you look at the statements of the Sahaba and the statements of the generation after them on the same topics, you find them very simple and easy to understand. So you realize the Sahaba had the least takalluf, the least burdening. They said it nice and simple, and the religion for them was easy to understand, but it was very deep as well. They had very, very deep statements. So those who came after them by a reverse understanding have less knowledge and more takalluf. Less knowledge, but more takalluf. So the knowledge is very little, but they have a lot of burdening of you. Right? They make it very complicated. So when you read the books of the later generations, in general, we're not saying every book, you generally find lots of complexity and not much knowledge. And when you read the books of the early generations and those of the later generations who wrote in light of the early generations, this is a point I want to make. Some of the Khalaf wrote in light of the Salaf, like they wrote based on what the Salaf said. You find what is based on the knowledge of the Salaf to be easy to understand, but the knowledge is very, very deep. So the Salaf had more knowledge and less burden. And the people who came afterwards had more burdening, more complexity, but actually less knowledge to go with it. And the likes of this has been reported from Ibn Umar. Ibn Mas'ud, he also said, radiyallahu anhum, you're in a time in which the scholars are many, but the speakers are few. After you will come a time where the scholars are few, but the speakers are many. Hence, whoever's knowledge is great, but speech is little, is to be commended. And whoever's knowledge is little, but speech is a lot, is to be blamed.